Welcome to the first official episode of the AfricaCann journey. My first guest was His Excellency, Mr. Christian Manahl, the ambassador of the EU to Lesotho. I wanted to interview Mr. Manahl to get his insight and opinion on some of the latest developments taking place in the EU regarding cannabis policies, CBD, and other regional issues. From my work within the AU's Expert Committee on Cannabis, I also wanted to see where there were possible opportunities for African countries and what impact the changes in the EU would have on African countries. So I'd like to give you a brief outline of Mr. Manahl's profile. Mr. Manahl has been the Director of the Political Affairs Division in the United Nations Organization Stabilization Mission in the DRC since June 2010, having served as Acting Director from February 2000. Between 2005 and January 2007, he was Senior Political Advisor to the European Union Special Representative for Sudan. From May 2004 to November 2005, he was a member of the Policy Unit of the High Representative for the European Union's Common Foreign and Security Policy. Between August 1999 and September 2003, Mr. Manahl was head of the Regional Political Section of the European Union Commission delegation in Nairobi, Kenya, where he also covered the Great Lakes region and the Horn of Africa. In that capacity, he covered the Mbagati Somali National Reconciliation Conference. Earlier in his career, Mr. Manahl was an Austrian diplomat. He was born in Bludenz, Austria in 1960. He earned a PhD in Humanities from the University of Vienna, as well as postgraduate degrees in Humanities and International Law from the University of Paris I, Panthéon-Sorbonne, and the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna, respectively. Good day. Thanks for joining us today on this episode of the AfricaCann journey. Today's guest is His Excellency, Mr. Christian Manahl, the Ambassador of the EU in Lesotho. Good afternoon, Mr. Manahl.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for giving us time to do this interview. We appreciate it a lot.
My pleasure.
Thank you. So today's interview is going to discuss some issues around EU and AU cannabis laws and policies. And I really appreciated Mr. Manahl's time and opportunity to discuss these issues and gain his perspective about some of the latest developments that have been taking place. So without further ado, we'll begin. So, Mr. Manahl, in light of the long-standing relations between African states and European countries, do you think that this gives African countries any competitive advantage from a commercial and trade point of view?
Well, I think yes, because it's a new market that is developing, and of course it depends on which African country. I understand that Lesotho is one of the first countries which has legalized the production of medical cannabis, and as such, of course, has an edge because it's further ahead compared to many other countries where cannabis is still criminalized and there is no legal production. So in that sense, I see a niche market for Lesotho coming up, not only in Europe but also in the wider world.
Okay, thank you. And in light of the for example, if we're talking about the cannabis industry, there are different ways to approach it. There's the industrial hemp side, there's recreational, which is still in contravention of the international treaties, but then there's the medicinal cannabis side of the industry, which for a lot of African countries, this side of the industry is quite capital intensive because now we're entering the pharmaceutical side of the cannabis industry. So, for example, in light of the recent judgment by the European Court of Justice regarding CBD, do you think that could maybe be an area where African countries could provide CBD-based products to, say, European markets, as the requirements for, general lifestyle products differ quite drastically from the pharmaceutical medicinal side?
Well, I hope that the ruling of the European Court of Justice will influence national legislation, and I hope it will help opening up the market for medicinal cannabis. It's obviously a different market than recreational cannabis, which has been for many, many years in Europe, in many European countries, ambiguous because it is within society controversial subjects. In many countries, the private use of recreational cannabis has been decriminalized, not legalized, but decriminalized in the sense that it has not been prosecuted. But generally speaking, the production and the marketing of cannabis for recreational purposes is still in principle illegal in, I believe, all European countries. Even if in some countries, in particular in the Netherlands, which is famous for the coffee shops, there is a certain niche market where the retail sales are regulated and tolerated. But as I said, it has been a controversial subject with ups and downs, and societies are still struggling on how to deal with that. The medicinal cannabis is a different market. I feel that there is more willingness to accept that as a new product which has its health benefits, and I hope that the ruling of the European Court of Justice will help opening up the market. Of course, in the end, it depends on the individual member states to decide. And there are differences still. We hope that since the European Union in many areas has had initiatives to harmonize its legislation with regards to different products, because of course we have an open market, and it is difficult to control the distribution of certain products if in one country they are legalized and in another country not. But my feeling from not so recent visits, not so recent because we couldn't travel most of last year, but from the time before the pandemic when I traveled to Europe, that more and more shops are coming up which are selling medicinal cannabis, and I have a feeling that this will be a market that is expanding, and that will be an opportunity for Lesotho as well.
Okay, thank you. You touched on the harmonization issue around the EU with regard to cannabis. I'd like to stay on that point a little bit to discuss what advances do you see taking place in the EU to harmonize, whether it's the definition of cannabis or the marketing of CBD-based products and so on. What progress do you see in that side of the legal framework?
Well, in a political and economic union with a common market, there is an obvious trend towards harmonizing legislation with regards to all products, but specifically food and medical products, so as to make sure that what is legal in one country is not illegal in the other, because then inevitably you have a tendency of people crossing the border and buying it where it's legal and then taking it home, and that causes ambiguous situations. So that there is a natural tendency in a common market to harmonize legislation with regards to all products, but specifically food and pharmaceutical products, and that is I'm sure that is going to happen as well in the case of cannabis. I'm not up to date on the very latest developments in that respect, but certainly the ruling of the European Court of Justice will be a big incentive for member states to look into that and come together and try to find common ground. And as I said, I'm confident that this will be easier than in the case of recreational cannabis. I'm also told that because it is such a different market and a different type of use, the legislation, legalization of recreational cannabis could actually, at least in the short term, in the short to medium term, undermine the marketing of medicinal cannabis. Apparently it is easier for reasons you might inquire with specifically with the companies here who are producing and marketing and exporting medicinal cannabis, but apparently it's easier to market medical cannabis in countries where recreational use is illegal, for reasons not entirely clear to me, but that seems to be the case.
That is true. In some of the discussions I've had with Canadian counterparts in particular, where they do have a recreational market alongside a medicinal one, they have found, certain individuals have spoken to seeing a trend where they find that the recreational market is actually creating a situation where it improves patient access to cannabis, because there's still a lot of challenges, particularly around getting prescriptions and also the cost of medicinal products. Whereas some have argued that some of the products on the recreational market, subject to the correct standards and the balance of the different components, could tend to heal or attend to the same problems which the medicinal products would. But I think these are issues that still need to be explored much more further. Again, guarding against the illicit market, tapping into the legal market that we're trying to establish. So those are some of the current concerns in the market. So I wanted to also discuss the recent decision at the UN's Commission on Drugs in December 2020. There was a landmark vote among members of the CND regarding the descheduling of cannabis to go to Schedule 1. I did pick up that the EU did, in terms of their vote, they based their vote on scientific and evidence-based data from the WHO, which is obviously very commendable. The African Union is also advancing similar mechanisms to try to engage as a unified body on such conferences and on such major decisions. Is there any advice that you would give to African member states when considering such controversial issues, such as cannabis in particular, when making a unified decision?
Well, I think it's a good thing that the African Union is seized with the matter and is trying to address this globally for the continent, because of course with the new African continental free trade area, Africa will be in a similar situation that Europe has been for a long time, or come gradually into this situation where you have an open market, and when you have discrepancies in terms of legalization of one product in one country and it's still illegal in another one, then inevitably you have smuggling and contraband, which of course feeds other problems. Mm-hmm. One of the main challenges of recreational cannabis, even people who would accept recreational use of cannabis have a problem with the fact that it is largely traded in the hands of criminal cartels. There is no control in terms of quality, there is no taxation, and of course there is a gray zone. Very often these same criminal networks which are trading cannabis are also trading hard drugs, and that brings a lot of other problems to which of course Lesotho is not alien, because long before medical cannabis has been grown and consumed and notably exported to South Africa from Lesotho. Mm-hmm. So it is an issue that governments have to carefully assess how to deal with that. Mm-hmm. Concerning Africa and the African Union, the fact that Africa has of course more member states with different political systems and different societal systems, some are more conservative than others, of course will not make it easy to come to a harmonization, and I wouldn't expect a quick harmonization of legislation. But once again, in terms of medical cannabis, it should be easier than in terms of recreational cannabis. Mm-hmm. Okay. I remember that there was a court ruling last year, if I remember correctly, or the year before in South Africa, mm-hmm. which decriminalized the recreational use of cannabis as well. Mm-hmm. It didn't legalize it, and of course this creates similar ambiguities as we have seen in many European countries. But of course, should South Africa eventually move to a legalization and control of recreational cannabis, that of course would be an interesting opportunity for Lesotho as well.
That is true. I also agree that the decision of the Constitutional Court around the private use of cannabis did advance the movement of free use of cannabis in South Africa quite drastically. Unfortunately, we haven't seen a similar decision taken in the Lesotho context. So in Lesotho, it has not been decriminalized. So those kind of inequalities and differences do then create parallel systems where you still have the illicit market taking place and then the legal market alongside, but then also you have marginalized farmers that are also then impacted in between. So we are hoping that in terms of legal reform and regulatory reform, these challenges can be overcome. But also I believe South Africa is also still in the process of developing their commercial industry, because there are still gaps in the current proposed cannabis bill around, yes, you're permitted as an individual to have cannabis in your possession, but another individual is not permitted to give it to you, you're not allowed to buy it, you're not allowed to sell it. So there are still a lot of gaps that we are hoping to address, and that will perhaps foster a better coordinated industry which would benefit Lesotho and the region at large.
Well, we hope so, but if we can go by the experience of European countries, we have been living with these ambiguities for many, many years. And of course, in the end, it's a societal problem. It's up to a society to decide whether or not it wants to legalize recreational cannabis, because there is no point in trying to impose something which then is not accepted by society. And I guess we'll need a bit more debate on that. There were times when we had such a debate in Europe and then it died down also, partly I believe because of the predominant role that criminal networks have played in the distribution of recreational cannabis, that I think has made many governments shying away from that step of legalization. But we'll see what the future brings.
Thank you so much for your time this afternoon, Mr. Manahl. Your insights have been very informative. And we would like to continue to engage and have these discussions, because I think a lot of the experiences of European member states are far more advanced and ahead of maybe where we are as a continent here in Africa. So we would like to continue to engage and learn what we can, rather than necessarily reinventing the wheel. So thank you for your time, and thanks for engaging with us.
It's my pleasure. I'm happy to have these discussions. I believe that Lesotho, being a small country, should focus on certain niche markets where it has a comparative advantage. Wool and mohair, of course, is one where I believe there is also a considerable positive perspective, because with increasing plastic waste in the ocean, I think people will move away from synthetic clothing, in particular winter clothes. 50 years ago, winter clothes were essentially natural, leather and furs and other things, and then came synthetics, and they have taken completely over. And of course, they are cheap, they are easy to handle in terms of production, but now we have seen that they cause other problems. So I think there will be a rethink towards natural products, natural fibers, and there is an opportunity for Lesotho. Textile industry in general has been quite a success for Lesotho. Under AGOA, we hope that we will be able to promote also exports of the textile industry to Europe. And I think cannabis might be another interesting niche market. So I believe a country like Lesotho has to focus on a handful of specific areas where it has a comparative advantage. And cannabis, medical cannabis, might well be one of these.
Okay, no, thank you. I mean, in light of that, we do hope that the industry continues to grow in the progressive line that it has taken. And we also hope to engage further with policymakers and regulatory members, as well as with commercial parties as well, to advance this industry, to gain and to advance these opportunities which His Excellency has highlighted. With that, we thank you for joining us for today's episode. Thank you. Bye.